Okay, so a little bit about us. If you've not attended one of our webinars as of yet, we are based out of Baltimore. We have this awesome technical excellence office in Tampa, where all of our technical team is mainly lives around the area. And we've got consultants all over the country in human resources, supply chain, financials, technical, PMO. We have pretty much any kind of resource that you would need to support your Lawson system and HCM systems. So with that, I want to kind of just talk about a little bit of how we're going to go through today's tech presentation. We're going to talk about some of the tricks that we've found throughout the projects, multiple projects that we've supported on global HR. And we're breaking it down into functional tips, technical tips, and project management tips. So if that's your role, or there's something for you in all of these roles. So grab your technical people if they're not sitting here yet. We'll do a little bit of an intro. I am Melissa Olson. I'm the HCM practice manager, and I will be kind of representing the leadership on a project. So your executives, your steering committee, strategic thinking in today's presentation. Jeremy?
My name is Jeremy Stoltzers. I'm a technical consultant and assist with technical GHR implementations.
And he'll be representing any of the technical side.
Correct.
My name is Jackie Dudas. I'm an HCM consultant, and I'll be more on the functional side, less tech.
And I'm Teresa Nelson. I'm a project manager, and I specialize in the global HR implementations.
All right, so the first one here, we do have, we did that little intro so that you would know who, when each one of us was talking, what we were talking about, because it's all kind of melded together here in the format that we have. But the first bullet we have right here is involving payroll. So one of the first things from the beginning of a project that you really want to do is make sure that you have payroll fully involved, fully aware of what's happening. You may think that because payroll is still going to reside in S3 or in another system like ADP, that they don't really have to know what's going on, but you know, you want to make sure people get paid even after you implement GHR. So you want to keep payroll in there from the beginning. Maybe they're using certain employee groups or job classes or something to run reports, and all that kind of stuff is going to change when you move to GHR. So you really want their input from the very beginning. There may be some times where, you know, they're going to be bored, but I'd rather them be bored than not have the information that they need.
Yeah, sometimes we find user fields that people in HR have no idea what they're being used for, so they don't send them over, and it turns out payroll needs them for some sort of reporting or processing.
When we look at training the technical team, so GHR introduces a lot of new technologies, the Landmark platform, if you're not utilizing that for process automation. And even if you are, there's still certainly a lot more of that embedded into the application. So it's very important that your technical team understands a lot of the infrastructure that supports the global HR application. So process automation, like I said, is an integral part of the application, as well as tools like Configuration Console and Spreadsheet Design are all very important for your technical team to know very early on so they can support the project.
The third one here is involve the whole organization, and this is actually one that I think Teresa kind of mentioned. Do you want to hit that one?
Yeah, so one of the things that really will give you a successful GHR project is making sure that you involve all aspects of the organization, especially when we get into testing and validating decisions. These are systems that we tend to think of as HR and technical focus, but really they're going to be a part of the life of your whole organization, and in one way or another everyone seems to interact. So it's really good to keep those things in mind. Making sure that you do involve, we talked about finance and payroll, but also employees and managers from other areas of the organization that might be interacting with the system.
And then on the executive side, you definitely want you want to have an executive sponsor to ensure they're championing the system and the decisions behind the system. So really strong leadership, we find, goes hand in hand with a really successful project. If there's not somebody there to make a decision or send a decision out to be standardized or whatever it may be, projects can stall out. So it is really important to have executive buy-in and somebody involved throughout the process that you can run things by, and PM can talk about risk with before it goes to a whole steering committee.
Yeah. Well, and kind of along those lines, right from the get-go, it's good to get those clearly defined project roles, and not just on the client side, but also from whoever your consulting partner is. It's really good to look at what availability looks like and discuss competing agendas, other items that might come up, and determine, how much time can each resource put in, and let that be a driver for your project schedule from the beginning.
Real quick, one more thing, not that it's even on the slide here, but another thing you want to definitely do from the beginning is document your design decisions carefully. So you're going to be making a lot of decisions from the get-go. Maybe you don't know the system super well yet, and those are going to change, but you want to be able to have that documentation from the beginning to figure out why you decided that. You're going to be making a lot of decisions, doing a lot of talking with people throughout your organizations, and it's hard to remember why you made the decision, but you may have hashed it out for 4 hours previously, and you want to have something to go back and reference after the fact. All right, so we got a bunch of bubbles up here. I'll take the first one.
So these are
Offline-
considerations
Yeah.
to start thinking about before you go even into your project.
So this one, the offline cross-reference file for mapping, this one is a little bit more once you're into the project. This one actually does refer to the interface between GHR and your S3 system. So if you have codes that are, you're going to have codes that are different in each system. Maybe it's your jobs and positions or your supervisors or your salary structures. They're going to be different in each system. You can mitigate that by trying to make them the same for the most part. So you can do your salary structures the same. You can use the short description on your jobs and positions and supervisors to equal the code in S3. But for everything that's not the same, you want to have this master file for mapping, because it's kind of this, it's not confusing, but it's this table in GHR that you have to go into and pick the business class in GHR and the table that it equals in S3, and you want to have that offline somewhere so that when you do copies, it's not copied over, and that way every time you need it, you can pull it from that offline file and load it into S3. So that one might make a little bit more sense once you're actually involved in the project, but that's a major one that I just wanted to make note of. Yeah.
And as we look at training the project team, this is from an application perspective. So not only your functional team that's going to be involved, but your technical team really need to be involved with the application training as well. As I mentioned previously, things like process automation are such an integral part of the application that the technical team is really going to have a pretty good understanding of how the application works to be able to support that.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk about training a little bit later, but it is important to make those considerations throughout the project and make sure that you're open to adjusting your training plan as needed, and making sure that it's not just thought of in terms of training one and done. It is multiple points through different phases of the project.
Yeah, and certainly as we've talked about the training in particular, but other aspects of the project, your technical team, it's not really just the functional folks go and do a bunch of stuff and make a bunch of decisions and then hand it off to the technical team to support it or whatever. Because, like I said, that technology layer is so integral. Your tech team is really going to have to be involved in pretty much every aspect of the project.
They can't support something if they don't really understand what the business process is and understand what kind of questions they may need to ask to help troubleshoot.
This next one here, Melissa and I beat this dead horse earlier today, or yesterday maybe.
Yesterday, yeah.
Clean up your job, position, and supervisor structure. So you don't want to put bad data into GHR. So before you even move to GHR, if you're still in S3 now, not even thinking about GHR, go ahead and get that cleaned up. You should also, I don't know if we have it on the slide here, but you should also fill in all of the holes on your job and position structure, and even your supervisor structure for like the reports too, because when you're doing your conversions from S3 into GHR, your conversions are going to kick out anything that doesn't have, like, if you have a position that doesn't have a job tied to it, your conversion is going to give you an error. So even if you have to create like an inactive job code and put that on your positions, make sure you have that, because otherwise you're just going to get all these annoying errors out of your conversions. But if you can get a really nice clean structure, even for historical positions and jobs, that would be fantastic. Then you can get that history reporting out of GHR in addition to still having it down in S3 too.
And for the supervisory structure, definitely have that cleaned up, but start thinking about the other ways you utilize your supervisors that you're not able to track in S3. So if you've got a supervisor that, maybe 2 supervisors for one person depending on shifts, but right now they can only see the primary supervisor is the only one who has access to that employee. Start mapping all of that out, because GHR does give you the flexibility to have matrix style supervisory structures along with your regular hierarchical supervisory structure. So if you've got, as I said, 2 managers for one employee, or maybe one employee has multiple positions. So they route up through maybe 5 different managers for different positions with different rates, different supervisors. All of those supervisors are able to see them in manager space, which is very new for us that are used to manager self-service. So start mapping that out and thinking what that supervisory structure should look like to reflect your organization.
So as your functional folks go through the project and identify areas that need to be configured or changed within the application, so forms and process flows and things like that, you want to create that master list of all your configuration requests, and these are the things that are done within your configuration console. And 2 reasons. Number one, it'll just help you throughout the life of the project, so you can see what's been asked and what's been done, so you can track those things. But even on an ongoing basis, then it becomes very critical, because as you look at applying patches beyond, there's some validation steps that need to happen to all your configurations that list becomes very helpful.
Definitely. I'm going to jump down to the S3 requirements here. This kind of refers to once you are live with GHR, when you're testing and you're running the interface down from GHR to S3. There may be some things that are set up on your HR10 or HR 10.2 as required that you don't really need them anymore, so you didn't build them in GHR. You're probably going to get errors that kick out of the interface saying that this is required or this doesn't exist. So check your requirements and make sure that everything that you actually have is required. If you want to add anything additional to be tracked for history, you can go right into those HR10 screens and check that out.
I can go back up to the validate your structure. So again, with the flexibility that you have in global HR, and also because most likely in your S3 system, you built your structure out a long time ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago, and you've kind of band-aided things when your organization structure has changed. You may have added a new process level, and it kind of exists over here on its own when it should have possibly been a different company. Just because you had to work within the confines of the system the way it was designed. So this is the time to now look at your organization structure and again map it out. You may not be able to do too much in your S3 system, but really have a strong understanding of what you want it to look like in your new system to really reflect the way you do business and the way if you have multiple affiliates or member organizations, the way they interact with your main organization structure.
And the last one here, this is a major one that I know I haven't encountered at multiple clients, and you guys probably have too. Prepare for auto numbering. It's a lot of mental preparation. I don't know if you can do a lot of preparation with your system right now, but what you have to get used to is the system is going to auto assign numbers for, I can't name them all off the top of my head, but definitely your supervisors and your jobs and your positions. And how we've seen a lot of clients do it is use the short description field in GHR to house the S3 code. So if all of your S3 codes are numbers, you might have a job that's job number 1 and the short description is 7. So that can be kind of confusing. Often configuration console is used to kind of change where those numbers are seen. At a client right now, we are actually we tricked the system to make everything in S3, their jobs in numerical order load into GHR in the correct order. So we've tricked the system so that they do equal in each place, but you just have to get used to the fact that you're going to see numbers as the actual code. And then those numbers, if you don't use the short description, that number is what you're going to be using in the cross-reference file that we talked about earlier. And then whenever you select a job or a position or an org unit is auto-numbered as well, you're going to be selecting that code rather than the number that you're used to seeing in S3. So just a fair warning for that one.
So something that we've touched on a little bit that is really key to a great GHR implementation are your training and your testing plan. And these are things that need to be part of the early planning phase. Your project managers should be starting to put these plans in place right at the beginning before you've even done discovery, before you've delved into design. There should be a plan for training and a plan for how you're going to test. So the training plan from a project management perspective needs to include several iterations of training like we touched on. There's that initial training, which is where you want to make sure that your super users have what they need to actually make informed design decisions. It's hard to make decisions for a system you've never seen. But then at the same time, that's not going to be the same level of training you want to deliver to your end users or to your technical team. So there needs to be a plan in place for when that's appropriate in the project. And then on the testing side, there's several iterations of testing you want to do. You want to have different levels and make sure that you have a plan in place for really rigorous data validation.
And along with the testing plan comes, a bank of testing scripts. Mm-hmm. So we can't iterate how important it is to have testing scripts that match your business processes. So you're not just validating that the screen works and it's functional, but that it works for what your process needs to look like going forward. Mm-hmm. And so that process of building out those scripts is happening throughout your design and configuration phase as well. I think we have a question.
For anyone wondering, that is an actual picture of Jackie Dudas running the Boston Marathon on Monday.
That was a...
No, this was...
no, that's not a real
picture.
A while
ago. Yeah,
that's still Jackie.
This is still me a while ago. Okay. I did run the marathon on Monday, so I was too tired to fight them to take this out of the presentation.
We're going to replace all our stock photos with pictures of actual RPIers in action.
Do we have a question or just that comment?
Just that comment?
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to reference it because he had the embarrassed smile as soon as it came up. I was like, oh, it looks like an inside joke or something. And yeah, that is her, and she is embarrassed that we put it in the slideshow. So, but we're proud of her.
Oh, guys.
Because we certainly could not have done it. I don't know, I'm not speaking for myself.
So decisions, lots of decisions to be made, and you will be overwhelmed for sure. But as you go through those, your conversions, so all those decisions that are made up front will affect how your conversions run. And you definitely want to solidify your conversion plan with that first round because you may need to go back and change some decisions after your first round of conversions because things just aren't going to convert. One of the things that Jackie mentioned previously, job codes and that auto numbering thing, maybe a different decision would affect that slightly using that short description and things like that. So you're definitely going to want to review that very intently with that first round of conversion.
Do you want to kind of talk about product line strategy? I know that's pretty important, a decision to make, and that has to happen.
Yeah, so when we talk about product line strategy too, we want to look at, so similar to S3, you can install multiple product lines in your same environment, and that's definitely going to be required here because you're going to want a product line for your pristine build. And when we talk about pristine, there's decisions that need to be made as far as what is actually pristine data. But largely, we consider that to be your setup data, your configuration data, all the options within the application that you can turn on or turn off.
Things that won't change.
Things that won't
Shouldn't
change.
change, yeah.
Right. When you start talking about things like structure and other things like that, it starts becoming a little bit of a gray area. So you're going to want a pristine environment for maintaining that data. And the reason that becomes important is it allows you to copy into your actual testing environment to do multiple rounds of your conversions. And then you're also going to want to consider having a development environment where your tech team can go in and just kind of start hacking away at things and really kind of try to figure things out and then once they got something working, then only move what's actually going to be used. And so it kind of keeps your final product line in a good state.
So what I'm hearing is about 3. You recommend at least about 3 to have. You have your pristine that stays with just the final build decisions.
Mm-hmm.
You have a test environment where your functional people are building, configuring, testing, and then you have your dev where possibly configurations or security or interfaces, those are developed and then moved over to your
absolutely.
test.
And some, you could even go with a 4th, and which would be a training environment then, which would be pre-configured data, your data, but converted data, but not messed around with during the testing phases and all of those things. So definitely you want to build that product line strategy out and figure out how you're going to utilize the different options there.
And on the S3 side, we always also say that you should have a dedicated product line for conversions and running the interface down back into S3 too. So.
Yeah, that's very critical because your global HR product line has to map to only one S3 product line. That becomes very critical, like Jackie said, for testing that interface that keeps your data in sync.
The last bullet here, I put this one up, constant dual maintenance between templates and system build. So I really like to maintain offline templates, again, because I think I mentioned before, sometimes you're copying from one system to another, you're copying pristine down onto your test or your dev, and it wipes out everything. So you want to have, again, just like we talked about design decisions, you want to also have the codes you determined, the mapping and the cross-reference, everything somewhere offline, just in case, so you can go back to it and reference that if you need to. In addition, having those templates will make it really easy for each time you do build it, because then you just rerun that upload that you ran last time, and it's a quick way to rebuild the system, which you're going to be doing a few times for your initial UAT or your UAT, your initial
User acceptance
testing, the first round of testing. Go
System
live
integrated
for sure.
testing.
Yeah,
Yep.
there's a lot of testing going on, so you're going to be doing a lot of building over and over again.
Another decision that needs to be made is leading up to your security model. So that stems from a segregation of duties. So if you don't really have that right now, if your people are kind of touching this, touching that based on who's got availability and time to do it, or who's in the office today and who's not, that's not the best way to go forward in building out your security model. Not everybody should have access to everything, well, that's usually what we see, that somebody kind of hits a roadblock and they're like, okay, just open up the access, instead of thinking, is this person supposed to be doing what they're not accessing? Will they be doing it for the long term? And in that case, the role does need to change. But if it's a short-term kind of proxy thing, come up with a solution for like a proxy role that'll give that person access for however long they may need, and then just take that class away. So there are things to think out before you even get to your testing, because by the time you get to your system integrated test, you want to be able to proof that security model, and people are able to access what they do need to, and also the negative testing that they're not able to see or access what they shouldn't be able to see based on their role in the organization and what that role entails.
There's also a bullet here for having a good understanding of your organizational roadmap and your business processes, and I think each one of us could probably speak to this. I'll start by saying that you should really know kind of what systems are sunsetting soon and what you want to take offline or take online, and remove those offline systems. So kind of there's multiple modules within GHR and talent management, so you can decide early on which ones you want to go with first. And then even within that, if you implement GHR, there's the competencies and the qualifications and skills. You can decide if you want to tackle each one of those in your initial implementation, or if you want to maybe just do competencies right now and get into credentials and skills later. So have a good idea of where things are currently tracked, where you're looking to track them in the future, and then kind of, if you don't want to take the whole beast, you can pick and choose which pieces of GHR you want to do right now.
Yeah, it is a big process to implement GHR, and so don't be afraid to take a multi-phase approach and do it in 2 or even 3 phases if that's what your availability looks like and that's what your team can handle. There's nothing wrong with that. In a lot of ways, it makes it a more efficient project.
Certainly that's good to plan early from a technical perspective, at least, especially for on-premise customers where you've got your landmark installation running on your in-house servers. You want to have a good understanding of that so your servers can be sized appropriately if you're going with dedicated hardware, or just have the ability with a VM server to be able to expand the footprint of that.
So that's a good point, and Richard Stout and I brought that up in an earlier presentation about that's a big decision to make before you decide to implement. Do you want to go cloud suite or do you want to go on-premise? And really think out the implications and consequences or pluses for both ways to determine. I think a lot of people think when you go cloud suite, that means you really don't need any technical people in-house to help maintain it, but that's not right, is it?
No, that's not right. I mean, all of the, Infor has taken the stance that, there's no more customizations, but it's configurations. And that's what the configuration console is for. That's what process automation is for. Those are the areas, the technical components of the application that you can really use to and configure the application to really meet your business processes. And a lot of those are very technical in nature.
And I think another thing going on to those configurations is being able to track those, document those, be aware that the more configurations you're putting into your system, the more you have to test whenever there's an update that comes out. Mm-hmm. So I think you guys had an example from your current client that you guys were able to put in an update in 2 days or something like that because the client had so little configurations on that part of the system that there wasn't a ton of testing going in.
Yeah.
Yep. Do you want to kind of?
Chip would know more. But yeah, the less configuration you do, the easier it's going to be every time you have to do an update, fewer testing. We did an update that we thought was going to fix something or do something, and it turns out we needed to do the next one out as well. And we were running right up against our time for SIT testing, and we said, we're going to just hold off on this update right now, run through SIT testing, and then do this update after SIT. So you want to make sure that if you are doing an update, you kind of know what you have. We had everything documented outright. We were doing the testing based on the update that we had installed at that time. So you just want to make sure you have everything kind of documented and written so that you can review it if necessary.
And as far as documentation goes, with those types of decisions and how the system's going to function, especially with the process flows, you want to utilize Visio really to map out those processes. So there's a very clear understanding of what that process is supposed to do.
Yeah, big time.
So how many levels of approval are needed, and any decision points along the way that may change the approval path depending on what type of request or what type of reason codes or things like that. So the more substantial your Visio documentation of those processes, the better the system's going to be to support and understand.
And we say Visio because not everyone can read process flow, and it's easy to put those Visios in front of the executive level because they can quickly see it and see what's happening and see what decisions are being made where. So.
And right, so it's both sides. It helps on the technical side because when you need to go in and make any changes, here you have documentation that's very visual and laid out. You don't have to go through the code. And then on the functional side, this is your to-be process.
Yep.
When you're marking down what your as is today and you want to see what your to-be will be post-go live, these Visios will at least give you the to-be of your process wherever there are decision points involved. So with that, I think we've hit most of the stuff we wanted to hit. Are there any questions you guys have for us? And it may not be a smooth tip or trick, but anything on the implementation process.
And real quick, if questions are coming in, I want to say that this isn't the most linear presentation, so we did create a document that we'll send to you with all of these tips and tricks kind of like in a list so that it's easy for you to reference and come back to them if you do need to.
All right, it looks like whatever questions folks have had, they've been asking this week, so I think we're all set. I want to thank Jeremy, Melissa, Jackie, and Teresa. Wonderful presentation, really appreciate it. And I want to thank all those of you who attended.
One question?
Yeah.
Which configuration tends to be the most difficult?
Oh, Matt might want to come in and answer that. Want to do a cameo?
What's the question?
Which configuration is the most difficult?
Which config?
to maintain and to keep up with? Or
I have
do you
an
do you
example.
Yeah, sure.
So the job and position issue where it does the auto numbering, a lot of people hate that the short description is shown everywhere, and if you use the short description as the S3 code, it will say like 123 next to the employee's name. So they'll say, remove it everywhere. Anytime anyone says remove it everywhere, it sounds easy, but these guys will be able to explain a little bit better that removing it everywhere means a ton of maintenance. It's on countless business classes and forms, and so I think one of the ways to keep your configurations a little more simple is to really narrow down where you don't want to see it, and maybe it's just your managers or employees, people that it would be like kind of hard for them to understand what that code means. That's where you would remove it or swap it with the long description. Did you think of anything else that was hard?
No, that's actually a very good answer.
And I have heard, and you might be able to validate this for me, that if you nest a lot of your configurations, that deals with performance speed.
Yeah, so certainly the more configurations you layer on top of within the application, configurations sit on top of the base code. Like I said, we're not modifying, we're not customizing, we're configuring. So it's just an extra layer. So the more that you have, it's certainly going to affect performance.
Follow up. Which is the easiest configuration to start with?
So easiest configurations are just hiding fields, setting default values on screens, and
Turning
things like
things
that.
different colors.
Turning things different
changing
colors.
labels.
Yeah. Labels, changes in that type of
Yeah.
very basic form manipulation.
You want to talk really quick about some of the security, the easy or hard things to do when you're modifying security with configurations?
Sure.
Come on in right over.
You got
gotta
it.
get right in here. This is guest star Matt Slazak.
He walked in just now.
Last man in, so I'm in trouble. So. Security modifications, probably the trickiest part about it, and we've touched on it in a couple previous
Presentations.
presentations. The difficult part is if you're going to change security, it's always that one field that you want to hide, for example, can be contained within multiple security classes. So if I want to lock it down, I have to lock it down from the one security class that you might expect, but it could exist in another security
Yeah, got us
class.
those drills. That's
Yeah.
where we would drill around and we would find like a pay rate that we tried to hide, and it would
Right.
show up somewhere else.
Right, that happens a lot, and so it's not necessarily difficult to do it. You just have to isolate all the
Mindful.
places where it might be, and it's an exercise in patience, just making sure that you can catch it in all those locations. But
So we have another question. You guys need to repeat it because they can't hear what it says.
Okay.
Are there dependencies between GHR and Cloud Suite FSM? Does GHR need to be implemented first, or does it not matter?
This is a good
To
one.
answer that one.
Do you
believe I
wanna
can
repeat
answer
that?
one
Here, do you
as-
wanna grab the
as best
mic
I
and-
can. So, because this is obviously something we've been very curious about, and the answer is
Wait,
So
Repeat the question.
You gotta
reiterate
repeat the question.
okay. The question is: are there dependencies between Global HR and FSM
Cloud
11?
Suite.
And this has to do mostly with posting of payroll to the general ledger. And it is a question that Stout and I asked when we were up at Winter Showcase. And our understanding is no, there's a, it's here on the board somewhere.
Global financial controller.
Global financial controller that basically acts as a translator. So your FSM is going to get populated by your S3 payroll. And your GHR is going to feed your S3 payroll. So basically it's a translator and it keeps them apart, for lack of a better answer. Anything
So
else?
I think that's it.
Wait, one more.
Oh,
Are there any diagnostic tools to help the location of where to test/fix a problem for security, for example?
So this is your question of it's showing up. How do I know where? How do I know where it is?
are there any diagnostic?
tools to help the location of where to test, fix a problem?
You gotta repeat it.
yes.
Yeah. Are there
any diagnostic tools available to troubleshoot where to make a security change effectively? Correct? Good? Okay. There's a couple things that you can do. You can, if it's something that's particularly difficult, you can start to take an approach where you strip down a custom security role to just one class at a time, and just start going through one class by class to figure out where it is. In other regards, you can start to try to find them by looking at the context of where you're invoking that. So as Melissa was saying, if you're looking for something on one of the drill around screens, do the control shift right click or left click, and you should be able to see at least where it's coming from. So if you see that it's being invoked from the work assignment business class, start to look specifically for that in some of the security classes. So there's not really a pure tool. No. There's not going to be a one-stop shop, unfortunately, but there's a couple ways where you can get to that information.
Yeah, I tend to read every single class through and understand exactly what that class does, what's in there, and what it hits. So I understand all of them before I even start building security. I don't start and then start researching it after it's built.
Right. And you can. Sorry.
No, I was going to say there's good documentation. There's pretty good documentation out there for the security classes and roles, and if you don't have that, you should be able to have a partner that helps you through that.
Right. If you have access to the data through ODBC, or if you export all of the security classes from the security class business class, you can also at that point just do a search like on the CSV file that's output. Again, it's kind of taking it step by step though. So there's a lot of like little places you can find it, but there's never going to be like a one-stop shop.
All set? All right.
One more.
One more. Shoot. We've added a lot of security rules in Lawson Security to hide social security numbers. Are social security numbers as prevalent in GHR as Lawson S3?
So the good news is yes. So we've done a lot of security in S3 to hide our social security numbers. Is it as prevalent in GHR? Good news is if you're trying to get to the social security number from the database, it's all encrypted. So it is not very easy to get to that number if you're trying to report or pull it or hide it or anything from the database side. On the other hand, it's going to be around on the app side. If people are pulling up the forms, that's somewhere you would use a combo of security and application configuration to hide it out. I don't know if you guys have any specific?
Yeah, the thing that is good about it is you can start to basically restrict down that entire business class, because it's no longer just a single field where you have to just look for
FICA number.
Yeah, you don't have to look for FICA number. You can go and restrict the entire employee ID business class in one of your security roles. But again, it's with that proviso that you have to look at every single security class within that security role to make sure it's locked down there.
Can you hide other fields that you deem sensitive?
Absolutely.
Can you hide other fields that you deem sensitive?
Yes.
Do you want to?
Yep. You can absolutely hide down, or you can suppress through security as well as through configuration console any fields that you want to hide. No problems with that.
Can you encrypt them?
Can you encrypt them?
You can't force an encryption. That
so the system itself determines that there's a handful of fields, social security number being one of them, that needs to be encrypted in the database. Yeah, I don't know that there's a method to encrypt
other ones.